being a great technologist does not necessarily mean you're going to make a great software engineering manager. And I've had to learn that the hard way sometimes, when I've been out of my comfort zone and I had to figure out what would make a good manager.
Rich, thanks for coming in.
No, pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. It's been a good few years since I think we last met face to face.
Yeah.
I remember it, even if you don't. It was in Marylebone at the train station.
I remember, yeah, you and your colleague, yeah?
Yeah, it's quite a few years ago now when I was still working in London every day. But for everyone who doesn't know, could you give a very brief kind of high level on just who are you?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So my name's Richard. I'm currently the head of engineering for Thinkfolio, which is an OMS, PMS tool for part of S&P. I've spent nearly 25 years in technology and the last 15 to 16 years in financial services. I've had a range of roles from hands-on development, team lead. I've worked at various different places, sort of various banks, hedge funds, and now I'm currently at a vendor platform. So I like to think I've covered a few different bases.
Perfect. We like to start this show, and I know that you've never seen it, so this will take you by surprise, with word association. So the knee-jerk reaction when I say the word recruiter.
People.
Okay, that's an interesting one. Normally it's like, can't stand them, basically.
People need people. And if the world didn't need recruiters, they wouldn't exist. So
Yeah.
People need people.
And in your experience, generally speaking, when you have to deal with them, is it majority positive, majority negative? How do you find...
I would say it's a real mixed bag. And over the last few years, I've started to figure out the people that I can engage with and they listen and I can collaborate with. And also the ones that are maybe they're junior and been doing a disservice, but the ones that are a bit more chances and trying stuff and probably won't last very long in the industry.
What stands out as one of the not so good experiences that you've had at any point in your career?
I get a lot of cold calls from recruiters via emails or speculative, here's a CV, this guy's really good. And I always make a point of replying back. You never know, I might need this person in the future. But I try and explain to them, I can't speak to them directly. If we have roles, we have processes in place in a PSL. I'm happy to connect them and I leave it as that. What stands out is they don't listen. I must be on some distribution list. I get month later, another CV, another person. Hey, just wondered, this person suddenly become available. I placed him 2 years ago. He's fantastic. He's just been made redundant. He's not on the market. He won't stay on the market for long. But I just sent you an email 2 months ago. Like, please listen to what I'm saying. So I repeat, you may not remember my email from last time. I can't speak to you directly about this. We have no roles at the moment. But the best way to get our roles is to engage with the talent acquisition team who can handle that and work on both our behalves. And then the third or fourth time later, at that point, I say, you know what? I'm not going to reply anymore.
Yeah. Well, you can't. I mean, obviously, either they're just not very good at listening, or you're caught in a kind of a spam net where you're just going to get one of these messages every X amount of months anyway. But so currently S&P sort of running a fairly decent sized org, as I understand it.
Yep.
What are you high level responsible for at the moment?
So high level, it's making sure the platform is both taking the right direction in a modernization front. We are making sure that we're supporting our clients on a day-to-day basis by giving their needs and wants are met and helping give strategic direction to the team in terms of making sure that they understand what the roadmap is looking like, how they're impacting the roadmap, partnering with the product team to understand what capabilities they'd like to achieve versus what reality actually might be, what we can achieve, partnering with our infrastructure teams on initiatives like cost savings in the cloud or how we can handle cloud migrations, and then sort of giving overarching best practices for the team and empowering the team to be more self-sufficient.
And how many people are you responsible for?
The development team is about approximately 40 people and our QA team is approximately 30 people.
All perm, direct
No,
reports?
it's a split. I would say it's about 70-30% in favour of permanent.
Yeah. How do you find, just generally across skill sets, how do you find sort of the market at the moment from a talent acquisition perspective? Like, is it sort of the same as it's always been, or are you finding it sort of easier or harder to attract, or to really find like the talent that you need?
It depends what's part of the spectrum we're looking at the time. So if we're looking for juniors or mids, we're looking for certain attributes as opposed to technology skill sets. Usually we'll find people with a healthy ambition, inquisitive nature, and a little bit of technical skill sets that we can work with, that we can develop, and they can stay with us a number of years. That's pretty easy to find, in my opinion, because fortunately, London is a wealth of talent available there. At the senior end of the spectrum, we want to be a little bit more critical, and we are looking for very specific technology skill sets as well. There's a lot of people that we don't think are up to the matches that we're looking for. So there's probably multiple people before we find the right fit for us.
So when you're more on the senior end, where people are more falling down, is it in the real sort of quantitative detail, like technically they're just not quite good enough or whatever, or is it more in the intangible personal characteristics?
Very few people at the senior end will fail for personal characteristics. I've only had one where we thought this person was too argumentative.
Right.
Most people fall down on the technology skill sets. They have maybe they're aiming too high in terms of salary brackets that they're aiming for, and they're not quite there yet. But maybe some people, despite the number of years' experience, we're surprised that their knowledge on certain areas is weaker than we would like compared to their peers they would be working with. So it's more on I would say 95% is more on the technology skill set side, so whether it's problem-solving skills or actually understanding a library or technology.
Right, okay. And so if you had someone who was perhaps a more senior person, I'm assuming that for them to get in the door in the first place, they'd have to have a fairly good track record of working in good shops and that sort of thing.
Yes, so depends what we're looking for. If we're looking for a senior technologist, sometimes they don't need financial services backgrounds. We're quite happy for them to come from a different domain if they can display inquisitive natures as well. They've done some reading before the interviews. So if we're looking for someone who's much more aligned with the technology side, we look at their background, what technologies do they work with, what impact have they had in previous roles, and then we will inquire about those through a 2 or 3 stage interview process. Sometimes, though, we might have a very specific role where we would prefer people to come from a financial services background. For example, in trading, we want people to understand what executions are and orders are, and have they worked with these platforms before. And that's where experience does matter.
So when you're finding because it always fascinates me is the right word, but like as someone who sits on the outside of the industry and looks in, I speak to a lot of senior people that are coming out good shops, and particularly people around the front office, and they've got good, domain exposure and that sort of thing. And as a recruiter, we don't have the bandwidth to technically assess how good or bad someone is. So we'll use benchmarks like, well, who have they worked for? Are they working for very rigorous shops? But then it sort of surprises me where you find people that have been in these organizations for quite a long time. So you make an assumption of they must have the technical chops because they've been in this place for this many years or whatever. But then you find that actually sometimes it's harder in the senior end of the market to find people that, despite having the background in the right places, still can't necessarily get to the depth that you need them to get to from a tech perspective.
Yeah, that's interesting. Chances are a lot of people from that bracket you've talked about have probably joined the firm as a junior or mid, so their technology skill sets were okay to be weaker and maybe haven't evolved at the rate they think they have, or you would like them to be at, to move to a senior position in a different shop.
Hence them potentially overvaluing themselves on the money. So to combat that then, because talent acquisition obviously is a massive driver for most companies these days at all ends of the spectrum, in terms of how do we ensure that we're finding the best talent, that we can attract the best talent, that we can retain them, that we can create environments that are diverse, and that we bring in alternate viewpoints and don't become kind of nepotistic sort of environments. Are you having, or have you had to evolve your methodology of testing, filtering, interviewing to try and get to those, yes, they are technically deep enough or not, opinions faster? Is that something you look at?
Yes, absolutely. So the best way I've refined my process with the teams I've worked with over a number of years, the best thing to do is have a phone call, people do a screening. And usually we just need to give an opportunity for one It's a half an hour phone call, 15 minutes for the candidate to ask questions about the role. Chances they may not, sometimes they might not be like the role. And that's fine. No one's lost any time. And they can ask a few questions up front to see if it's something they'd like to understand more and learn more about. And 15 minutes from our side where we can just ask them quick fire technical questions. And we expect them to get maybe 80% of those right. And if they pass those quick fire questions, okay, then we move on to the next stage. And our next stage is, we find the best way is the technical stage before we moved on to the team fit. But this is where it gets a bit contentious. What is a good technical stage look? What does it look like? And I can give, there's loads of negativity around why do companies use HackerRank? Why do they use Codidity? Why do they use leak code style questions? The reason why is to remove bias. Because if I put any one of my developers in a room with other people, they will all walk out with different opinions of the same developer, even though they might have asked the same question. So to remove bias, we need to standardize how we're going to assess candidates. And one of the best ways is HackerRank and Codidity because the questions are standardized. It could take away, it's automatic assessment, and you can tell HackerRank or Codidity from a hiring side what you're looking for, what benchmark you're looking for. You can even put your own questions in there and tell HackerRank how you want it to assess the candidate. And then it can remove bias from that. So that's one of the reasons why companies use those. I'm not going to offer an opinion if that's right or wrong. That's just explaining why they do that. The process that we follow at the moment is we give people a candidate a takeaway assessment. We say, look, here's a problem statement. We hope it takes you about 60 minutes. Obviously you're free to spend as much time as you want on it, but try not to spend ridiculous amount of hours on it. It's designed to be a 60-minute assessment. When you're ready, you can submit it via this mechanism. And then we'll review that, and we've already got like a checklist that we've agreed internally of how we're going to review the code, what we're looking for, what we're not looking for, what are the fundamentals that we're looking for. It's designed to be, the problem statement's designed to be not too big, but a tiny bit vague so that a candidate can then show off their skill sets, not just answer the initial 1, 2, 3 questions, but show off a little bit of the grey area. So on the senior end of the spectrum, we'd expect them to show off a little bit more and show us some of their skill sets around the area. And then we'd use that as if they pass our assessment, we use that as a frame of reference on the third and final round, where we'd bring them in and it would be 20 minutes to talk about their assessment, what they chose, what they did. We try and challenge them to see how they stand up for themselves, how they handle being challenged, make sure they're not, we want a discussion. What we don't want is arguments. So it's how they can take the emotion out of it and be challenged and listen to other points of view and maybe even stand up for themselves, say, no, I want to push back on that. I think my way's better because of X, Y, Z. And let's discuss that. And then that gives us a bit of an idea of team fit. And then I'll come in at the end of sort of management style, final part of that, the last half an hour, to then talk about any other questions on the role, what we're doing here, clarify a few things, see how they would fit in the team, really.
It's interesting, the tech test, because that's such a contentious subject, certainly on LinkedIn and things like this, where the layman's kind of recruitment view has always been, for me, if you're a software engineer applying for a software engineering role, then it's completely reasonable for you to do a test that assesses your software engineering ability. But actually, I never even considered the concept of bias because, it makes complete sense. Like, companies are forever trying to remove bias in terms of their processes to try and get, the best people, those that are truly there on merit, as opposed to they used to work for this company and I used to work for them as well, or whatever. And that probably is a pretty good and effective way if you can define the parameters early doors to ensure that when you do move to that team fit stage, you're only talking to people that are there truly on merit and not there because they've worked for a certain place before, they come from a certain university or whatever. Do you find you get much pushback from people in your processes? So you do the initial phone call, everything's good. You then say, right, the next stage is now you're going to do a HackerRank or whatever it is that you're going to do. Do you struggle with people at that stage?
No one says no to the test. I can't think of any examples where no one said no to a tech assessment, whether it's online or takeaway, or we've done it in person assessments. They would come in, we'll do a pair programming. I didn't think that worked. I thought that took too much pressure on the candidate. But where I get pushback is when when we give them negative feedback.
Right.
So sometimes they submit their assessments, they're quite proud of it, they're really happy with it. They submit it and it's not quite to the levels they think it is. And we have to be honest. So I always say to everyone, if people invested time in our process, we need to invest in the feedback. So it doesn't have to be war and peace, but a couple of paragraphs would be nice. It's something they can take away, work on over the next couple of years, and maybe try again. I get a lot, when we give them feedback, I would say 40 to 50% we get feedback on our feedback.
Right.
When people push back, oh no, your assessment's wrong, my way's better. Well, wow.
Yeah.
And they go
It's
off
not
on
your
one.
decision, so.
They're going off on one, oh, your assessment's flawed. If that's what you're looking for, you should have told me. Blah, blah. We did tell you if you read the problem statement.
Yeah.
So I would say it's embarrassingly a high statistic. We get negative feedback on our feedback.
It's interesting that you get 100%, yes, I'll do the test, and the issues come later, because certainly I would say it's maybe 20% would get pushback. People saying sometimes flat out, I don't want to do a tech test. And the answer would be, they're not relevant. And we kind of go, well, define relevance. Like, interview processes they're subjective. You know, people can choose to assess the way that best suits their culture. But as a technologist at heart, or someone who's come out of an engineering background, what is the big deal?
So I think the pushback is, it's the leak code style questions where it's more computer science based, that you could argue doesn't form a real world problem. It's all it's mythical and lab based algorithmic type questions. Right. So I think people feel, and they can be tricky sometimes, especially when you're under pressure. Let's say you're doing a hacker rank where you've got a time limit, and it's kind of tricky. And if you don't get it straight away, you suddenly get into this perpetual cycle this negative cycle where I'm under pressure, I need to move on. I've got 4 questions to do. I'm running short of time here. And it creates this sweat, if you like. And I can see to some extent the argument why these questions may not be based on reality. Again, it's up to the company. They can choose to use their own real world questions or use HackerRank or Codility style questions where it's already there and you can make a selection. I would point out fundamentals are fundamentals for a reason. So while I'm never going to write a DAG directly, I might use a library off the shelf, for example. Understanding how it works under the bonnet shows problem-solving skills. And especially in buy-side firms, maybe a little bit more now in sell-side firms recently, but buy-side firms, they're looking for fundamentals. Like, do you have the basics? Do you understand what a dictionary is? Do you understand what a map is? If you understand the basics, then this is the type of person we want to work with, because they can throw their hands to anything. So by understanding the fundamentals and demonstrating your problem-solving skills, it shows the company that this person, we could give them this project or this project and they'll get to grips with it. They're not just pigeonholed to one technology. So, but I think people struggle with that because they feel the pressure of these computer science-based questions. And I can understand that to some extent, but I keep explaining, as I say this to everybody, there's a reason why people use them. Because they want to see that you've got the fundamentals. They want to see that you've got what they consider to be the basics.
Could somebody who doesn't have a computer science degree, maybe they have a degree in, I don't know, electrical engineering or something like that, but they've evolved into a very good software engineer, they've worked in good places, they've been exposed to high levels of rigor, and they've delivered. Is there a route where the nature of the leak code style questions, you could miss those people through the test?
That's a good question. I would say yes, obviously. I would also say one of my old bosses did a philosophy degree and got into software engineering by chance. But absolutely, you're right. A lot of people still, I like to think most people still read for technology and understand the base, want to read about it themselves. So they might understand what a map is, or these, the quick sort algorithm at the high level. Yes, so I think you're right. I think maybe there's an element where you might miss the people that didn't, just because they didn't do a computer science degree or maybe didn't go to university at all, doesn't mean they're not going to be a really good engineer. That's a fair argument, yeah.
Are there ways or do you, I guess, in your assessment, can you account for what degree they've done in terms of how you evaluate the output of their test?
It's a great question. I don't think I've ever looked at their CV and say, what degree have they done versus what's their code output. I think we're just looking at whether you've been to university or not, have you got the right experience to consider yourself a senior engineer? And if you're considering yourself a senior engineer for a senior position, there's a benchmark that we expect you to meet. And I don't think the background really matters. How you get them is up to you. Obviously, to your point, I think it sounds like it could be easier for someone who's done computer science as a degree versus someone who didn't do that as a degree or didn't go to university. But as long as you get to that threshold, that's all we're looking for.
Because I only ask because I remember there was an example of there was a chap that I was working with as a candidate. This is going back a few years. And he interviewed with a hedge fund, very reputable fund, and he failed the tech test. But his background was perfect to the non-technical eye. Like, he'd worked in brilliant places and he was a really nice guy, very good communicator, very positive. He then interviewed with another hedge fund who didn't technically test him with an off-the-shelf test. They did a verbal technical interview. And this is probably 5-6 years ago, when they weren't quite as, heavily used as they are now. And they hired him. And he's still there, became a great hire. And he's in a very rigorous, sort of a quant, analytics-oriented team, aligned more to fixed income. It's a very numerate environment, and there's some really good computer scientists there. And he is, year in, year out, top performer. But I always found that quite interesting, of like, well, there was another fund who lost out on, who clearly is a very good developer for that reason. And I don't know, as a bit of a layman, and I'm not a technical person, is there a risk, playing devil's advocate, where the computer science modules are there, but obviously tech's always evolving? So does it potentially create a need to find, like, do you create a bit of a blind spot in terms of your hiring, particularly if you use agencies who maybe would twig and sort of go, well, let's just find people with computer science degrees, whereby trying to avoid bias, you create a bias?
Yeah, agreed. It's also part of the reason why I don't use these tests. I'm not here to say people should or shouldn't. I'm just trying to explain why some companies choosing to do those style questions. We use an assessment, like a take-home assessment, where we try to model a real world problem, so we can see how they approach it. And it's up to them how they want to show off their skill sets here. So I think that removes, for us at least, it removes computer science bias, as you refer to, which I think is really good point you made there. So I think whether you do it through a pair programming tech interview, or it's face-to-face asking questions, what did you have? We want to really understand their impact. And you can do that a number of different ways. So for us, it's, can they make the impact and solve a problem at the threshold we expect? I'm not looking for someone to write an algorithm that's like that takes 2 milliseconds. That's not what we're trying to do here. I want to see that, can they take a problem and have a business impact here?
It sounds like to me, just moving on from the tech test topic slightly, that you really think about this sort of stuff, which would imply that, do you enjoy your role now as a leader?
Yeah, I do.
Because you've obviously, I think when you and I met, certainly years ago, like, you were very much a software engineer.
Yes, at the time, yes.
And then you've transitioned into technical leadership, built the teams up, now have quite a big org, lots of moving parts. You're responsible for people, but also you're responsible for things like this, like, how do we remove bias in talent acquisition? How do we find the best talent? How do we assess juniors versus seniors? All this sort of stuff, which I always see again, speaking as an external looking in, it always looks to me really challenging for people that are really good software engineers to become really good leaders.
It definitely is. It's the same as any job. Like, if you're a good teacher, would you make a good headmaster? So it's just, if you're a good salesman, would you be the best sales manager? Not always. That's not always true. I'm not suggesting I was the best developer. I've worked with amazing developers, and I was probably in the right place at the right time in terms of taking on responsibility. But being a great technologist does not necessarily mean you're going to make a great software engineering manager. And I've had to learn that the hard way sometimes, when I've been out of my comfort zone and had to figure out what would make a good manager. So it's not just about the technologies and solutions that you're delivering, it's about the culture. It's creating an atmosphere where the team feel empowered to make decisions. You've given them the governance and operating model that they can succeed in and they can flourish in. They understand what they're doing and how it's going to impact the business. They have an opportunity to challenge that and offer their thoughts on that. So it's creating all these different frameworks and structures so that they can flourish. I think someone once said this to me early in my sort of management career. They said to me, if you position yourself as they're not here, your team aren't there for you, you're there for them, it'll completely change your mindset. So and he was completely right. It's now, I can think about what can I do to help my team succeed, because the team succeeding is my reputation. So if the team are succeeding, it means I'm succeeding in my role.
So it's like the servant leader mentality. The leader serves the team as opposed to the team serves the leader.
That, yeah.
And So in your current organization with I think 70 odd technologists that you mentioned, I'd imagine in there's maybe some that you can see have those attributes to become leaders in their own right, and then there's probably some that don't. But you've got to find a way as a good leader to offer progression
Absolutely.
for both. So is this something that you have to actively craft within the environment, in a sense of like, well, everyone kind of is quite familiar with the vertical, good at the job, become a lead, bit more of a lead, and eventually you become an out and out leader. Do you have to consciously try and craft alternative routes for people that are great talent that you want to retain, but to them progression means something else?
Absolutely. And I think there's a recognition now that to succeed and to maybe be recognized financially or otherwise, you shouldn't necessarily have to be a people leader. You can become an SME and be recognized in that way. A lot of fintech firms have tracks for that, and a lot of banks now do. And fortunately, my company does this as well. You can be recognized as an SME or a people leader, and you can get promoted through the ranks without having to take on people leading. Because some people may not suit managing people, but they are exceptionally good at what they do. They're exceptionally good as technologists or exceptional domain knowledge and experience, and they can do that role really well. But sometimes those roles don't always exist. So it's how do I give people more responsibility when there isn't I can't give them a promotion, but I can give them more responsibility. So there might be, say, standout performers who are maybe junior or mid-level, and I want to retain them. I can see that they could become brilliant people, brilliant senior engineers in a few years' time. I can see that. I can see they've got the right traits, they've got the right attitude and aptitude, and importantly, they're delivering. People can have a great attitude, but if they're not delivering, then it's all mythical. So how do I make sure I retain them? Because otherwise they'll go. They're going to get calls from recruiters. They're going to get calls from their colleagues who've moved on. So how do I keep them interested? If I can't get them promoted, I can give them more responsibilities. So I can ask them what they want to do, whether they want an architecture track or delivery track or people leading track, find out what interests them, and then try and give them more responsibilities in that direction. Just today I had a conversation with one of these colleagues, one of these guys who he's going to be a standout person going forward. And I was asking what he wants, because the project he's working on is probably coming to an end in the next couple of months. And I want to make sure he doesn't think that's it, his role's over.
Yeah, nothing's left.
I want to find the next thing for him. So I was asking what interests him, and we were hashing out what would interest him, what would that look like in terms of responsibilities, what would his sphere of influence look like, both directly and indirectly. It would mean working with other teams, and you have to manage not just the interactions of those teams, but the transparency to people like me. I don't want to be micromanaging. I don't want to be checking in all the time of how things are going. I kind of want that information to already exist so that it's just there for me. So making that transparent and owning that from day in, day out. So it's finding those areas of opportunities for people. So I haven't gotten promoted, can't at the moment, but I can give him more responsibilities. That keeps him interested and keeps him wanting to do that. And that will probably excite him and also take him out of his comfort zone a little bit. And then I need to work with him, or get his direct line manager to work with him over the next 6 months to close those gaps, because you won't grow unless you move out your comfort zone. If you stay in your comfort zone, you're never really going to progress. You're just going to become a follower. You want to start leading yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Do you find in speaking from the people that you've led, not so much from a personal perspective, is there an imbalance when you think about retention, keeping people happy, stopping them moving on to the next thing? Is there an imbalance one way or the other in terms of how important the role changing in a direction that they want it to change towards is versus more money is? Like, meaning, could you pay someone more money every year but keep them doing the same job and keep them happy? Or could you keep changing their job in a way they want to change but keep them on the same money and keep them happy? Or do you have to do both in tandem?
I think you don't necessarily do it in tandem, but you have to do both over a period of time. I think there's always going to be upper limits to what you can do with someone financially, and you're going to be constrained by your company on that regard. And yes, you can do what you can when the opportunities arise to try and make sure they feel they're being recognised for their contributions. But when people want to leave, it's one of two reasons: either they think they could earn more elsewhere, or the role doesn't excite them anymore. And I would say my experience, people are leaving are generally, it's 65%, 2/3 probably leaving because the role doesn't excite them anymore. They're ready for something else that we can't offer. So for me, I can try and make a financial recognition periodically, but it's more important to make the role more interesting. I think if I can make the role more interesting and entice them that way, I think I have a better opportunity of retaining top talent.
Yeah. Yeah, I find this subject very, very interesting because if we were to headhunt someone, the thing that brings them to the table 7, 8, 9 times out of 10 is role based or progression opportunity based. It's very rarely money. So there's a concept of I should get paid more to move jobs because I'm taking a bit of a risk, I'm going to a new environment, and that's kind of how the market works. But the driver is not money other than very rare circumstances. However, when then someone tries to resign and they get counter-offered, they normally get counter-offered with money. And then you see their waiver and then they push. It becomes like, this is a really good offer. It's like, well, it's never been about money. And the money's the same. The money's the same on both sides of the fence. But the shift happens probably more for emotional reasons of you're under pressure and you're having to have difficult conversations. But it's very interesting that to retain people in a positive way is job progression. To retain them in a negative way, i.e. they're going to leave and you want to try and stop them leaving, it's the opposite. It's money is normally the
it's to throw money at the problem situation. And I think I've seen stats in this where people who accept counter offers that end up resigning within 6 months anyway, quite quickly.
Well, the problem doesn't fundamentally get solved because the job doesn't change.
Yeah,
and that's the hard thing to change. You know, you can almost front load some comp progression to someone and then it slows them down in terms of how they would have progressed. But it's hard to fundamentally change a role on a dime. And maybe people say what the person wants to hear, but then 6 months goes by and it hasn't happened. And then it's like, okay, it's not going to change, I'm going to leave.
So I think I've been fortunate in the last few years where I think I've done a good job trying to keep people interested in the roles by giving them more responsibility and delegating more to them. People that have left us has been for, I think have left us for other reasons. One was financial, one was geographic. They were moving to the West Country.
And are you hybrid? Are you in the office all the time?
Yeah, so I think we're one of the few companies that's still hybrid. Looking at what's going on in the market. We are 2 days a week in the office, globally. There isn't enough desk space to do more. One of the reasons why it works so well for us is virtually every team is distributed globally. So I have more developers in Manchester now than I do in London. I have more developers in India than I do in London. I have developers in Europe. Some of our sister teams are in the US and Canada. So we're so globally distributed so that even when you're in the office, sometimes when you're having a meeting, you're still at your desk on a headset because people aren't all in the same building.
Yeah. So flexibility, communication, dealing in a global business obviously completely makes sense, having a hybrid or even something that trends more and more towards the remote. Are there any drawbacks for the individual? Let's say for the company, but if you're a mid-level software engineer who's ambitious and you want to make a good career and everything else, flexibility is great. Everyone enjoys that. Are there any drawbacks to being remote?
Yeah, I'd say the two it's mostly for the juniors and mids. I think the seniors will be okay. They're usually a little bit more self-sufficient, but it's so much easier to tap someone on the shoulder and say, can you just check there's something in my code? I can't figure out why my test is failing. Then just going onto Teams and saying, have you got a minute? Can you join? Can I share my screen? It's so much easier. And it's also, it creates a barrier and you're less likely to do that, to ask someone for help. And secondly, it stops the water cooler moments where you speak to people you may not necessarily work with day in, day out, but you speak to people and find out what's going on. You find out something interesting. Well, that's quite interesting. I'd like to learn more about that. Or yes, I'll come to that show and tell with you. You may be interested in that. So you miss out on those opportunities. I think if you're a senior, you're good at finding out those opportunities virtually. You don't necessarily need to be in the office to find out about those opportunities or to speak to people. So there are negative aspects for the junior and mid-level people, I would say. But because our teams are globally distributed, even if they're in the office 80% of the time, I'm not sure how much more benefit they'd get.
It must be good for you though, to go back to like talent acquisition, that flexibility must be quite a good positive, for you in terms of attracting talent.
It is. It is.
Because people
very
want
much
it. Like certainly the more senior end of the market. Well, it's interesting. I would say in my interactions now, there's much more of an acceptance of going back to 4 or 5 days. I think people just kind of see that is where it is. But then there are still some stalwarts who are sort of like, look, I don't need to be there that many days. I want flexibility, and they become quite, it's sort of like a line in the sand of like, I will not go and interview any companies that are more than 3 days a week in the office or whatever.
Yeah, I think people will be surprised. I think if they gave them everything they were looking for in a role, financially, environment, opportunities, growth, but it was 4 days a week, they'd take the role. I think they would. I think they just need to maybe get out of their own way a little bit sometimes.
There are some. I think there's some people who maybe in COVID moved out of London and now it's like logistically very difficult to go back. Or
yeah, that's true. That is
they've
true.
got, the wife works and then she does 2 days a week in the office. The husband does 3 days a week in the office. There is a very entrenched who takes the kids to school culture or whatever, that by them doing more days means that their other half has to now do less days, and then they've got to balance that with their own, and it creates knock-on dependency. So I think there's some of that stuff going on, but I think there's also just quite a lot of people, like you say, need to kind of get out their own way a little bit, in a sense of don't sacrifice the right opportunity over having an extra day at home.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Because you might, in 5 years, regret not getting that,
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think it's every problem is solvable. It's just a question of time and complexity. There's no such thing as an insolvable problem. You might have got into a routine where it works for your family. That's fine, and you can figure out a way that works for your family. People remember we did this for years. We're not the first family to have to worry about both parents working and trying to juggle the school runs. So how did other families cope? There's obviously there's solutions here. We've just got to figure out the possibilities here. I actually think I'm more productive sometimes at home than in the office. There are a lot of conversations I can't have in an open plan office. So I'd often find myself walking around with my laptop saying, let me just find a pod. Let me just find a spare room.
Yeah.
And I also save on the commute time. So I can do more. I can get 2 hours more work done at home. Without the distractions of an office, I'm very much more focused. Yeah. However, some people find they need to be in an environment where it creates their mindset to focus on. I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all solution, but I think my opinion is there is a shift now to be more in the office. More companies are returning to the office. I think some of the ways some of the companies that have handled it and just decreed 5 days in the office straight away quite quickly is quite aggressive.
Yeah, the bounce from like 2 to 5 overnight sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's probably not the right way to do it. But so your career sort of arced through sell side, broker, buy side, vendor now.
Yeah.
Was that planned? Like, did you want to have a taste of sort of different styles of the industry, or was it fairly organic?
A little bit organic, but I also knew where I wanted to go. So when I first wanted to get into financial services, I like the complexities, the fast-paced environments that I thought it would be, and it very much was. So I got an opportunity in a sell-side bank in late noughties, and that was a really good role for me. I was there for 4.5 years. I think I did really well there. And when I was there, I started to think about where I'd want to be in sort of 5 years' time. And I try, when I say this to people, don't think more than 5 years in front of you, because if you start thinking 10 to 20 years, there's so many things could happen that could change that. But do have a 2 to 5 year plan. And I think I started to be interested in maybe working for a hedge fund. And I'm not going to dress it up. I think one of the reasons would be the financial aspects. Hedge funds are known for being heavy on the bonus side, and I thought that opportunity excited me. So I wanted to work towards that. So I needed to get buy-side experience. So I worked for an asset manager, and then I tried to find opportunities to work for a fund. I didn't pass my first 2 or 3 interviews with various funds. Got through to sort of mid to latter stages with a fair few places, but never quite got over the line. And then I eventually found my way into a hedge fund, and just really enjoyed it there. And I think that's where I started to think, what do I want to do next? Now I've achieved what I wanted to achieve. I've got into a hedge fund. which is where I really wanted to be. And it was a really good place to work. The environment was healthy, dynamic, really smart people, lots of opportunities for progression. And I say that because it had opportunities to not just focus on, here's my list of tickets, get them done. I can now work on the peripheral, because in my experience in funds, that every fund's structured differently, and I've worked for 2 or 3 now, but the principles don't change. They don't just want a developer who can just code one language. They want someone, a technologist who might know that language well, might know Java well, or C# well, or C++ well, but can also throw their hand to this or throw their hand to that, or see there's a problem there, or implement logging frameworks that start to learn UI technologies and take that all on without any guidance, and just go with and just run with it to fruition. And I can see opportunities there that really excited me. And I think I also started to realize at that point now I was a lot further in my career, and I started seeing, I was just chatting to various people. I'd seen a lot of mistakes made in previous places, not where I was at, but previous organizations where projects were badly run, flawed probably from the start, and allowed to carry on for a year and a half or 2 years before senior management finally realized that this wasn't going to work. And I often found myself frustrated when I'd offer my opinions, saying, I don't think this is going to work for X, Y, Z, architecturally or structurally or for whatever reason. And I just wasn't being listened to. And I started to think that interests me, trying to make things succeed, not just solutions succeed, but projects succeed and have an impact that way. So I started to be interested in sort of leadership capabilities. How do I deliver a project? What is a successful project here? And try to define that and understand the stepping stones to make that. So that, I like to think I did a good job, and it was offered an opportunity to become a tech lead at a hedge fund there, and have developers be responsible for developers and take on more responsibility and more accountability. And I think that's where I started to realize you need to delegate more. When you progress, you need to let go of what you were doing previously. You can't carry on doing that. That's fine if you're going to be an SME or an expert in that area. But if you're going to move on to leadership roles, you've got to let go of the hands-on elements. You've got to delegate more, and you have to start thinking about what does the team need to succeed? What are they missing here? What's holding them back? And just finding problems that I had to solve on processes. I've gone from managing a team of 13 developers to now 40 developers and 30 QA analysts. So it's a bigger role. And again, it's now thinking the next level up. How do I give my team leads, the tech leads, the skill sets and what they need to succeed in their role, to give their developers the governance frameworks, and giving them and finding out what's holding them back or holding their teams back from delivering, and helping them empower their own teams.
And when you made that shift, so you said, you wanted to sort of touch the buy side and see that environment, and you felt it was a good place. How would you predominantly categorize the differences between sell side, buy side, just from your own experience?
It's a great question. They're both great environments. Let's be clear, it's not like one's better or worse than the others. They suit different people. Sell side, you'll find there are lots of disparate teams, all with their own function, and they exist for a reason. They exist because there's a lot of work for them, and if they don't define the boundaries of their work, they'll deliver little bits and not the big picture work. So there's lots of different teams, all responsible for their own area, and their interactions will often be via an email distribution list or a ticketing system, and that's fine because they processes of work. You raise a ticket, it flows through to this team, and they will do their bit, and it's fine, and it gets done a couple of days later. Sometimes not even involved. You just go, all right, I've got notification, it's been done. Oh, thank you. And that's all well and great. And you'll have, in a front office sell side environment, there could be 100 people. In a front office technology environment, there could be 100 people at a large tier 1 bank. And even that, you could even have, some of the really big ones could have 200 or 300 people. There could be one for per asset, for each asset type, they could have their own technology teams. In buy-side firms, the environment is much smaller, and on purpose, you won't find much of a job description. You'll find a very high-level, superficial, we need enthusiastic, keen people who can come and solve complex problems, but they don't really put much meat to the bone. They expect you to come in and find problems to solve. Yes, there'll be a project that they want you to work on. There might be, yes, we want to interface with this new EMS platform, or We want to take a market feed from Bloomberg or Reuters or Refinitiv. We want to. We've hired a new portfolio manager, and he wants to start trading in repo trading and things. So you need to start building the tools that they need. But it will be headline statements, and it'll be up to you to go and figure out what's going to make that thing succeed. They'll expect you to go in, roll your sleeves up, figure out what's working, what's not working, find out how to do it, whether it's engaging another person over there or trying something yourself and getting it done. And they don't want you to work in a vacuum. No, it's everything's very transparent, and they'll stop you if you're choosing something that's really left field and not really in keeping with the technology roadmap. But they'd want you to define your own problem and solve it. Whereas the sales side, the problem is really well defined, and then it's very clearly written up. A lot of thought's gone into it, and they've really thought about it. Buy side, they will keep evolving all the time, and they won't stay still.
What's next for you? Like you mentioned, looking 5 years out is probably a good benchmark. So like, what's your 5-year trajectory at the moment?
So I think I am my 5-year benchmark when I first took on this role was to really modernize the platform that I'm working on, like move it into sort of more a SaaS product. At the moment, it's not a SaaS product; it's a single tenant solution. For those who don't understand what that means, it means every one of our clients has their own instance that we host, which means they, in theory, have their own version of the product for them, and that creates a problem for us in terms of testing and giving them updates. And we'd like to be a SaaS product where we're constantly pushing changes out all the time, and every client sees the benefit of that. And it reduces their testing window. We handle all the testing for them. It's fully automated. It's a web-based system that can have all the integrations that we know and love. It's still a desktop application. So for me, that was what I wanted to do. And we've made some good inroads on that front. We've got some new modules coming up in the next 18 months or so. That's going to be really exciting. Can't really say too much about them at the moment, but they are definitely showing us a pathway in creating repeatable patterns and some of the platform services we're going to need to take on this challenge. So I think I'm 3 years in this 5-year cycle. I wanted it to be delivered in the 5 years. I'm not sure the whole platform will be delivered in 5 years, but a good inroads. For me, that is where what I wanted to focus on for the 5 years. So it's going well. There's a lot of challenges on the way, and curveballs thrown our way from management or from clients that we have to deal with, but these things, that's just the nature of the job.
Well, I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I really appreciate it. It's good to see you. It's been fascinating to listen, particularly the technical testing and the concepts behind it, around bias and things like that I'd never even thought about, but actually make complete sense. And then also that evolution into leadership and learning to delegate, learning your own evolution that has to, I guess, come first in order to then lead others. So, thanks very much. Really enjoyed it.
It's great to chat with you. Thank you.